The Bentley arrived on a Monday morning in the back of a flatbed truck, and the man driving the flatbed looked almost apologetic about it. Marcus Webb watched from the doorway of his garage. Webb's Auto, a name he'd painted himself on a piece of cedar plank 7 years ago, the letters slightly uneven because his daughter Abby had been sitting on his shoulders when he did it and kept tilting sideways to see what he was doing. The sign still hung above the door. He'd never had the heart to replace it. The Bentley Continental GT was midnight blue, or it had been once. Now it sat on the flatbed, looking like something that had been argued over by a committee of very expensive engineers and then abandoned. The hood was up. Someone had already been inside it. That was clear from 10 feet away, which meant someone had already been wrong about it, which meant Marcus was probably the third or fourth attempt, not the first. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked out into the cold. Webb? The flatbed driver checked his clipboard. That's me. Got a Bentley Continental for you. Owner says it's been dead 3 weeks. Who had it before? The driver handed over a folded sheet of paper. Marcus read the names. 2 dealerships, one in Raleigh, one in Charlotte. A specialty shop in Asheville that charged $800 an hour and apparently hadn't solved anything for it. The repair invoices were stapled together. He flipped through them. $41,000. 11 days of combined labor. A new battery, 2 new modules, a fuel pump that probably didn't need replacing, and a note from the Asheville shop that read, in professional language, "We are unable to replicate the fault at this time." Marcus folded the papers and tucked them in his back pocket. "Leave the keys," he said. He found out about the owner 40 minutes later when a black Mercedes pulled into his lot and a woman got out who moved like someone who had never once in her life waited for anyone. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, in a gray wool coat that cost more than most of the cars Marcus had worked on this month, and she looked at his garage the way people look at something they've decided to tolerate rather than accept. Her name was Whitfield. Catherine Whitfield. She ran a medical device company headquartered in Charlotte, and she said this the way people say things they expect you to already know. She had an assistant with her who stood slightly behind and to the left and wrote things down on a tablet without being asked to. "Mr. Webb." She didn't offer her hand. "I was told you're good with European cars." "I've worked on a few." She looked past him at the Bentley, which was now sitting in the first bay with the hood still up and the morning light coming in through the side window. "I've already spent $41,000 on that car. I want you to understand that before we discuss anything, I saw the invoices. Then you also saw that 3 separate shops, including a Bentley certified dealer, couldn't find the problem. I saw that." She turned back to him. Her eyes were very direct. Not unkind exactly, but precise in the way that some people who have been running things for a long time become precise, like they've learned to aim their attention the way other people aim a camera. "So, what makes you different?" Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the car. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in a few days." Something moved across her face. It wasn't quite surprise. It was more like the adjustment you make when someone doesn't behave the way you've anticipated. She had probably expected confidence or a pitch, or some variation of "I've been doing this for 20 years and I guarantee you" she hadn't expected honesty. Fine," she said. "How long? Depends on what it is." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She held his gaze for another 3 seconds. He counted, not from defiance, but from habit, because he'd learned a long time ago that the pause after something is said often tells you more than the words, and then she nodded once, like she'd made a decision. "I'll be in town through the week," she said. "My assistant will give you a number." She turned to go, then stopped. "I would like updates." "Daily. If there's something to update you on, I'll call." She got back in the Mercedes. The assistant gave Marcus a business card without making eye contact and got in the passenger side. They pulled out of the lot, and Marcus stood there for a moment in the quiet, watching the dust settle. Then he went inside and started working. The first thing he did was nothing. That sounds wrong, but it wasn't. The first thing he did was sit on a rolling stool beside the Bentley and read every invoice, every diagnostic report, every note from every technician, in order twice. This took almost 2 hours. He made a cup of coffee and let it go cold and made another one. What he was looking for wasn't what they'd found. It was what they hadn't looked for. $41,000 of repairs, and not a single technician had written down the ambient temperature when the fault occurred. Not one of them had asked the owner where the car had been parked. Not one of them had documented whether the failure was consistent across different conditions or whether it came and went. Marcus went out to the parking lot and called Catherine Whitfield's number. She answered on the second ring. "Have you found something?" "Not yet." "I have questions." A pause. "All right, where does the car live? Garage or outside?" "Outside. I have a garage, but it's used for storage." "Why?" "What was the weather like the first time it wouldn't start?" Another pause, longer this time. "It was cold. It was a Saturday. Early November. There was frost on the windshield. Has it ever failed to start when the weather was warm?" Silence. "Miss Whitfield?" "No," she said slowly. "No, it hasn't. It's always been in the cold." "Thank you," Marcus said. "I'll be in touch." He hung up and stood in the lot for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then he went back inside and started taking things apart. Not randomly, not following the path the other shops had taken, but working backwards from a specific theory, the way you work when you've been doing something long enough that your hands already know the question before your mind has finished forming it. The garage was quiet except for the sound of his tools and the radio playing low in the corner, a station out of Boone that mostly played old country, and occasionally, without apparent irony, Fleetwood Mac. His daughter Abby would call in a few hours, probably around 4, when she got out of school. She was 11 and thought it was her job to check on him, which it was, in the way that the jobs you didn't ask for are often the most important ones. His wife, Laura, had been gone for 4 years. The anniversary was in 6 weeks, and Marcus didn't think about that, or tried not to, which was different. He kept working. The theory was this: the Bentley's Continental GT, this generation, this vintage, used a specific type of connector in the primary ignition circuit that had a documented tendency in cold weather to develop a resistance issue. Not a failure, not a break, just resistance. Enough that the signal from the start button couldn't complete its path the way it was supposed to. In warm weather, the metal expanded fractionally. The contact held, everything worked fine. In cold weather, the tolerances tightened, the contact faltered, and the car simply sat there like a very expensive piece of sculpture. This was not a secret. It was in the technical service literature, buried in a revision update from 7 years ago, written in the way that automotive engineers write things they would prefer not to have to write. Technically accurate, minimally descriptive, and formatted in a way that made it very easy to scroll past. Marcus had scrolled past it himself once, years ago, while working for a manufacturer in Michigan. He'd been 32 then, with a title on his business card and a team of 12 people under him, and a future that looked like it was going to happen in conference rooms. Laura had been pregnant with Abby. He'd brought home the technical updates and read them on the couch while she watched television and fell asleep with her head on his shoulder. And he'd thought, filing it somewhere in the back of his mind where the things you might need later go. Cold weather, ignition circuit, resistance. He hadn't expected to need it here. He hadn't expected to be here at all, in a garage in a small town in western North Carolina, working alone on a Monday in February with the radio playing and his daughter's lopsided sign above the door. Life doesn't ask what you expected. He found the connector at 11:47 in the morning. It looked fine. That was the point. It looked completely fine. You could look at it all day and see nothing wrong, because the fault only appeared when the metal contracted in the cold, and right now the garage was 58 degrees and everything was sitting at normal tolerance. He photographed it anyway. Then he photographed it again from a different angle. Then he went to his workbench and wrote down what he'd found with the time, the temperature in the garage, and a description of the connector that was more precise than it needed to be. Because Marcus Webb had learned long ago that precision was not about distrust. It was about respect for the problem, for the person who owned the car, and for the fact that you only get to be right once. After that, you have to prove it. He called Catherine Whitfield at 2 in the afternoon. She answered immediately. "You have something. I have a theory I want to test. How? I need to get the car cold. I'm going to put it outside tonight, ideally below 32 degrees. If I'm right, I'll be able to replicate the fault tomorrow morning, document it, and fix it." A pause. "You need to make it not start in order to fix it." "Yes." "How long does the repair take once you know what it is?" Marcus leaned against the workbench. "Less than an hour." Silence. He could hear something in the background on her end, a meeting, maybe, or an airport, or the particular quality of quiet that exists in large office buildings. The other shops had the car for 11 days combined, she said. I know, and you think you can fix it tomorrow morning. If I'm right about what it is, yes. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not softer exactly, but less armored. What is it? What do you think is wrong? He told her. He explained the connector, the cold weather tolerance issue, the technical service revision. He explained it the way he would explain it to anyone, without condescension, without unnecessary simplification, but also without jargon used as a wall to keep people out. He'd always believed that if you understood something, you could explain it to anybody. If you couldn't explain it, you didn't understand it as well as you thought. She listened, without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "The Bentley dealership in Raleigh had that car for 4 days. I know they have 17 technicians. 2 of them are factory certified. I know, and they didn't find this. No." Another pause. Then quietly, "Why not?" Marcus looked out the side window of the garage. The afternoon light was coming in at a low angle, the way it does in February, when the sun doesn't bother getting very far off the horizon. A pickup truck went past on the road outside. Someone's dog was barking somewhere in the middle distance. Because they were looking for what was broken, he said. And nothing was broken. They needed to look for what couldn't complete. She didn't say anything for a long moment, then, "Put the car outside tonight?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Mr. Webb?" "Yeah, call me Catherine." He put the car outside at 5 o'clock when the temperature was dropping. Abby called at 4:12, as predicted, and he sat on the rolling stool and talked to her for 22 minutes about her history project, which was about the Lewis and Clark expedition, and about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend over something that had started as a matter of principle and become a matter of stubbornness, which Marcus pointed out were not the same thing. She said she knew that. He said he knew she knew. She said goodnight and told him not to forget to eat dinner, which she said every night, which he found both exhausting and necessary. He ate dinner. He left the Bentley outside. He went to bed at 10:15 and lay there for a while, thinking about the connector and about the way Catherine Whitfield had said his name at the end of their call. Not the words, but the fact of them, the way some people arrive at a moment of acknowledgement, the way you arrive at a rest stop on a long drive. Relieved briefly to be still, he slept. In the morning it was 28 degrees. He could see his breath in the air when he walked out to the car at 6:45, before the sun was fully up, before anyone else in town was moving. He got in the Bentley, he pressed the start button. Nothing. Not a struggle. Not a click or a groan or an attempt. Just silence, the way a circuit fails when the path isn't there. Not broken, not interrupted, simply unavailable. The signal sent and received by nothing. Marcus sat in the car for a moment in the cold, with his hands in his lap. He was not a man who celebrated privately. He'd worked with people like that. Engineers who pumped their fists when they solved something, who needed the feeling to have an audience even when no one was watching. Marcus felt something quieter. More like recognition than triumph. Like when you've been looking for something in a house and you finally find it, not because you were clever, but because you were patient. He got out of the car. He photographed the temperature reading on his phone. He went inside, poured coffee, and called Catherine Whitfield at 7:05. "It didn't start," he said when she answered. A pause. "You replicated it." "Yes." "So you were right." "The car was right," he said. "It was telling the same story every time. We just had to listen to it in the right conditions." He heard her exhale, not dramatically, not like someone who'd been holding her breath for weeks, though maybe she had been. Just a long, slow breath, the kind you take when something that has been costing you has finally agreed to be understood. "How long?" she said. "Come at noon. Bring coffee if you want. I'll have it running before you get here." The repair itself took 47 minutes. He cleaned the connector thoroughly, treated the contact surface, replaced the terminal with the corrected specification part from the revised service kit, a part that cost $62, and ran a complete circuit verification at ambient temperature, and again after artificially cooling the connection with compressed air. The resistance reading went from the problem range to clean continuity both times. He documented everything. He wrote the temperature, the resistance values, the part number, the time. Then he started the car. The engine came up smoothly, without hesitation, with the particular settled confidence of a machine that has been correctly understood. Marcus sat in the driver's seat for a moment and listened to it idle. There was a quality to the sound of a healthy engine that was hard to describe to someone who hadn't spent their life around them. It wasn't just the absence of fault. It was something more like presence, the machine doing what it was made to do, without apology or effort, just the quiet assertion of its own function. He pulled it forward out of the bay and parked it in the lot in the thin winter sun. Catherine Whitfield arrived at 11:50. She was alone this time, no Mercedes, no assistant. She drove a dark green Range Rover, which surprised him slightly, and she parked it crookedly the way people park when they're not thinking about it, which meant she'd been thinking about something else. She got out and looked at the Bentley sitting in the sun. She walked to it, slowly. She put one hand on the hood very lightly, like she was checking the temperature, or maybe just confirming that it was real and present and no longer a problem. Then she looked at Marcus, who was standing in the doorway of the garage with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Start it," she said. He walked to the car and opened the door and pressed the button. The engine caught immediately, cleanly, without any delay. The sound of it in the open air was different than it had been inside the garage, richer, somehow, like a voice that finally has room. Catherine stood beside the car and listened. She didn't say anything for a long moment. 47 minutes, she said finally. About that. I paid $41,000 to 3 separate shops over 11 days. She said it without anger. It was a statement, not an accusation. The way you say things when you've had time to accept them but haven't quite finished being astonished by them. You paid for a process, Marcus said. It's not the same as paying for an answer. She looked at him. That's a very generous way to put it. It's an honest one. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "How did you know where to look?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe. I read the invoices. Nobody had documented the weather conditions at time of failure. That was the first thing. Once you know it's a cold weather fault, the number of possibilities gets a lot smaller. That's it? Reading the invoices? And knowing what to look for once I had the right question. I'd seen this before, years ago. Different context. Same principle. Where? Michigan. I was working on a production line issue. Different manufacturer, different component, same basic failure mode. Cold tolerance, contact resistance, intermittent fault. We spent 3 weeks on it before someone said the words ambient temperature in a meeting, and the whole room went quiet. She absorbed this. How long did the repair cost after that? 40 minutes, 45 maybe. He paused. The part was $11. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, more like the moment before one. So what do I owe you? She said. I'll write up the invoice. It'll be a few $100s for labor, $62 for the part. Call it $350 total. She stared at him. $350, give or take, after $41,000 somewhere else. I didn't do $41,000 of work, Marcus said. I did the right work. She looked at him for a long moment in the thin February sun, and Marcus didn't look away, not because he was making a point, but because there wasn't a point to be made. He'd done a job. He'd done it correctly. That was the whole of it. Do you know, she said slowly, that when I asked about you, before I brought the car here, I was told you were fine for routine work. She said the last 3 words like she was picking them up with tongs. One of the shops in Charlotte. They said you were fine for routine work, but this was a complex electrical fault and I should look for a specialist. They weren't wrong that it was complex. They were wrong about you. Marcus said nothing. She turned back to the car. She stood there for a moment, looking at it running in the sun, listening to it idle. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out her phone and dialed someone. It's running, she said. Not to Marcus, to whoever was on the other end. Her voice had something in it that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite vindication. Something more personal than either. Yes, this morning. Someone figured it out. A pause. I'll explain later. She hung up and looked at Marcus. Thank you, she said. It was said simply, without the performance that people sometimes give to gratitude, the way they lay it on thick to make sure you understand how sincerely they mean it. Catherine Whitfield said it the way she said most things, directly, accurately, and without anything extra. You're welcome, Marcus said. She nodded. She took one more look at the car, still idling, still steady. Then she looked at the sign above his door, the cedar plank with the slightly uneven letters. Webb's Auto, she read. That's me. Who painted it? Marcus looked up at it. He hadn't looked at it in a while. You stop seeing things when they've been there long enough. He saw it now. The way the letters started straight, and then wandered slightly to the right halfway through. The way the apostrophe was a little too big. The way the W looked like it had been made by someone going slowly and carefully. I did, he said. My daughter helped. Catherine Whitfield looked at the sign for another moment. Then she got in the Range Rover and drove out of the lot, and Marcus listened to the Bentley idling in the sun until she was gone. And it was just him and the car and the quiet of a February morning in a small town, which was, if you let it be, enough. He went back inside and wrote up the invoice, $348. He put it in an envelope. Outside, the engine kept running, steady and unhurried, doing what it was made to do, because someone had finally asked it the right question.